because the revolutionary movement demanded social improvement in the living standards of the masses. This is why they made revolution. Well, you say you can't get them in a year. You can get them in a year. You can get them in a week. But in order to get them, you have to have sufficient power and structures of power to be able to transfer resources towards those people who require them.
Yes, but look, in the previous year, you've had demonstrations, Tahrir Square, everything to kind of like make capital fly out the country. So, no, you can't alter things in a very short time.
I don't agree with you. In 1952, just a little bit of background to this. In 1952, Abdel Nasser came to power in Egypt, overthrew the monarchy by a coup d'etat, a military coup d'etat, leading a revolutionary movement inside the army, in the lower layers of the army. He was an army lieutenant colonel. When he came to power and overthrew the monarchy, sorry, would you mind? Just because it's noisy in the Hyde Park, it's difficult to talk with someone else who's talking at the same time. Sorry. When Nasser overthrew the monarchy, they set up what they called the Revolutionary Council. The Revolutionary Council instituted in 1953 free healthcare, free education, food for the masses. So if they could do that in 1953, how comes it's impossible in 2013? 60 years on, they can't do that. Who says?
Can I give you my personal reading of
No.
of what's happened? Thank you for your patience.
I'm sure you'll give it anyway.
Well, you're right about that. It just seems to me that the people were alarmed that Morsi had used that part of democracy, which is everybody votes, in order to gain power. And once in power, was doing things which were not part of democracy. He was, for example, censoring the press, imprisoning, and some people say torturing political opponents, and seemed to be on a road which may have led, and in the view of many people, seemed to be leading to actually abolishing voting, and therefore creating a dictatorship, a Muslim dictatorship, to replace a dictatorship that they just got rid of.
There are some people who argue what you argued. The more liberal sections argue what you argued. I don't think that's actually what's behind what's going on. I think the issue is the social conditions of the masses. The head of the IMF went and met with Mohamed Morsi, and they made an agreement that the Egyptian government, in order to create the conditions for investment, as you say, would cut back on subsidies to fuel, on subsidies to food, on subsidies to welfare. They would carry out austerity against the people. The people had made a revolution 1 year before. They did not, had elected the government 1 year before, made a revolution 2 years before. They did not believe this was what they wanted out of their revolution. And so once austerity began to be introduced, and the people didn't want this austerity, they wanted to protest for improvements in their conditions, that is what's behind the Arab Spring. Although people like to make out, maybe some liberal Democrats supported by the West, or the Muslim Brotherhood supported by from the underground Islamic forces, or the forces external to socio-economic issues. This is false. The fundamental driving force of the Arab Spring is the social rights and living standards of the masses. That's what drives people onto the streets.
Yeah, I'm quite willing to go along with that, but
there were no poor people.
Now, Libya is a different issue. Libya and Syria are two separate issues. In Libya and Syria, you clearly had protests against dictatorship, which were then transformed into imperialist intervention, into foreign intervention, to establish Western control of those countries. That was the objective. They succeeded in Libya and they failed in Syria. To date, they failed in Syria. It looks like they will fail in Syria, at least for the foreseeable future. And when they now talk about Egypt, well, as I said, the truth of the matter is, there would have been a violent conflict in Egypt in any case. It happens to have been that it takes the form of the army intervening to crush the Muslim Brotherhood, but actually this was, if you like, a delayed representation of the violent conflict that would have broken out between the mass of the people on the streets only, 30th of June this year. That mass unrest had to destroy the existing power base of authority in order to gain some benefits. Now, what will the army do now they've defeated the Muslim, and the Muslim Brotherhood are defeated? The idea that they're going to somehow rise up tomorrow and win, that's complete nonsense. Rubbish from the television. But you can't outlaw a force that has mass support. If it's really got mass support, then it would be able to destroy the government and destroy the army. But it doesn't. The truth of the matter, they spent their force, and therefore they had to rely upon martyrdom to gain authority. But what will happen inside the army now? This is the question. What will happen in the state and the army? Now, most of the perspective being given is that there's about to be established some authoritarian, totalitarian dictatorship in Egypt. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I don't think that's what's going to happen at all. My own reading is this. What will happen is, one is, the army will allow elections. Two is, somebody, I don't know who, but somebody will emerge probably from within the army who will raise the demands, the same demands that established the Egyptian Republic in the first place. In other words, food, shelter, housing, subsidized fuel. They will introduce a program of reform to raise the living standards of the masses. That is how the army will re-establish their authority amongst the masses. That's what they expect. Otherwise, if they don't do that, if some figure does not emerge that introduces a relatively radical social reform in Egypt, what will happen is that another government gets elected, the army intervenes again, because the masses will take to the streets to demand improvements in their living conditions. The fundamental reason for the revolution in the first place is the living standards and livelihood of the masses.
Give them bread and
Look, it's not about circus. Giving people bread is not an easy task. Even in the United States of America, the richest country in the world, people often don't have bread. So to mock that idea is foolish. For people who live in a country like Egypt, where half the population live on $1 or $2 a day, the idea of bread is a fundamental concept. Not some, liberal idea, it's a fundamental concept. It's not a chimera, it's a fundamental reality of existence. And therefore, because of that, the struggle for bread is a revolutionary struggle. That's what we've seen over the last period. And the fact that it's taken a violent course in the way that it appears at the moment is merely because the army is seeking to keep its own position within the game. The army owns at least the minimum figure, 15% of the economy. Probably 30 or 40% of the economy is indirectly or directly controlled by the army. And therefore the army has the potential to utilize that economic power to serve the interests of the masses, as long as they oust the crony sections within society who've been stealing and plundering resources and utilizing the army's position to do that. Either the army will side in that sense with the masses to raise the living standards of the masses and improve their livelihoods by utilizing the resources they have for the benefit of the people, or the army itself will be the next target of the revolution, the overthrow of the rule of the army. So one or the other. After all, the Muslim Brotherhood and the army were two wings of the capitalist class in Egypt. One is now destroyed, so only the army remains. And the army is composed of ordinary soldiers linked to the masses, which is why they refused to use the army against the masses at the time when the demonstrations against Morsi took place. 17, some people say 25 million people demonstrated. This, don't forget, 6 weeks ago, this was the biggest demonstration in human history, anywhere in the world. And therefore the idea that this is simply destroyed by a few deaths, okay, there's a lot of deaths, but it's a death in Egypt, is wrong. These people, not the same people, but there would have been a violent conflict in any case in Egypt. It was unavoidable because we are dealing with a transfer of wealth and power from one layer of society who own and control the wealth and power to another, the mass of the people. And the only way to bring that about is by fundamental revolutionary change. And the army is intervening to hold its position within the fort and try and, if you like, maintain their authority within the parameters of this revolutionary crisis that has broken out in Egypt. So I think the reading that most of the Western press is giving to this is completely false. There is a revolutionary... I mean, after all, they talk about 500 dead in Egypt. Okay, it's a terrible thing, 500 dead in Egypt. But how many people did the United States kill in Iraq? 1 million people killed in Iraq. Every couple of days they drop bombs on Afghanistan, even now, and kill people in Afghanistan. How many people they kill in Libya with the NATO bombs? But all of a sudden, of course, the Egyptian army is the monster. And the same Egyptian army, don't forget, is funded to the tune of $1.5 million by the United States government. Every single year, $1.5 billion funded from the American government to support them. Now, the Saudis, the United Arab Emirates, they just given the army 12 billion. The army take the 12 billion, they hope they could maintain their authority. But I believe, just as Abdel Nasser emerged in 1952, reflecting the internal crisis within Egyptian society, and spread an ideology of food, shelter, housing for all the Arab people. This ideology gained a root in Syria, in Libya, and across the Arab world at that time. It was a powerful force across the Middle East. The British, the French, the Israelis, they all attacked Nasser, 1956, and bombed when they nationalised the Suez Canal and utilised the resources of Egypt for the benefit of the people. So too, I believe that within the Egyptian army, a layer will emerge who, if Sisi carries out policies to enrich the few of Hosni Mubarak and his friends, the 12 generals they've appointed to run the country, then a layer from the lower layers of the army will join with the revolutionary movement and overthrow them. This is a living revolution. And all such living revolutions inevitably take on a confrontational dynamic. It's an unavoidable dynamic. I mean, the American Revolution was violent as well. In fact, it's written in the American Constitution. If a government does not do what you want, you have the right to rise up with arms against it. It's in the American Constitution. So why should it be so bad for the Egyptians to do the same? Are there any questions?
No questions, but I'll just... okay, contributions. I think, when you said it's living standards, I agree. But the living standards is the fact that there's so much unemployment in Egypt.
Yes.
And,
but does there need to be unemployment in Egypt?
But that's, juggling around with government is not going to solve it, is it?
It's not just about juggling around with government. The army in Egypt and the state in Egypt have a huge swathe of the economy. They could use that section of the economy for the benefit of the people. They could also use the power that they presently have in terms of popular support to transfer wealth and power from a minority to the majority, from Mubarak's friends and the friends of Morsi towards the interests of the majority. Food, clothing, shelter, higher living standards, full employment, free education, free healthcare. They can provide that. If they could provide it in 1952, they can provide it in 2013. So, if they carry out a radical reform to benefit the majority of the people, this will be like a lightning rod to the Arab people across the whole of the Middle East and North Africa. It is this revolutionary ideal that the people took to the streets for. That's why revolution occurred.